The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Dry Creek, Arizona territory. It was the kind of heat that made the air shimmer like water, turning the distant mesas into wavering mirages. Sheriff Caleb Hart stood in the doorway of his office, watching the stagecoach roll to a stop at the depot across the street. The year was 1878, and Dry Creek was still what most folks would call a frontier town: 3 saloons, 1 church, a general store, and enough trouble to keep a lawman busy most days. Caleb adjusted his hat, shielding his eyes from the glare. At 38, he cut an imposing figure, tall and lean, with shoulders broadened by years of ranch work before he'd taken up the badge. His face bore the weathered look of a man who'd spent more time under the sun than a roof, with deep lines around gray eyes that had seen too much. The star pinned to his vest caught the light as he stepped onto the wooden boardwalk. The stagecoach driver, old Pete Hawkins, was already unloading luggage. His movements hurried. A dust storm was brewing on the horizon. Caleb could see it building like a brown wall in the distance. Pete knew better than to linger when the desert was fixing to throw one of its tantrums. "Afternoon." "Sheriff," Pete called out, tossing down a worn leather trunk. "Got us a passenger today? Lady from back east, Missouri way?" Caleb nodded, his attention drawn to the coach door as it opened. A young woman emerged, accepting Pete's offered hand as she stepped down. She wore a navy traveling dress that had seen better days, the hem already dusty from her journey. Her blonde hair was pinned up properly beneath a simple bonnet, but wisps had escaped to frame a face that spoke of exhaustion and worry. She couldn't have been more than 24 or 25. Caleb reckoned. The girl, really stood beside her trunk, clutching a small carpet bag and looking around with obvious uncertainty. Her blue eyes swept the street, searching, and Caleb saw the moment her hope began to fade. Whoever she was expecting wasn't there. "Ma'am," Pete said, tipping his hat. "Your trunk's all set. Your man coming to fetch you." The woman's cheeks colored slightly. "Mr. James Dodd. He should be here. We corresponded for months. I'm to be his... that is, we're to be married." Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew James Dodd, a merchant who ran the largest dry goods store in 3 counties, a man with soft hands and hard eyes who always seemed to have more money than his business should account for. The fact that Dodd had sent for a mail-order bride didn't surprise him. What did surprise him was that Dodd was nowhere to be seen. Pete shifted uncomfortably. "Well, ma'am, I gotta be moving along. That storm's coming in fast." He glanced at Caleb, a silent plea in his eyes. "I'll see to the lady," Caleb said. Stepping forward, he touched the brim of his hat. "Sheriff Caleb Hart. Ma'am, you said you're here to meet James Dodd." "Yes," she said, her voice carrying a slight tremor despite her attempt at composure. "I'm Evelyn Ross, from Independence. Mr. Dodd sent me the fare and—" She trailed off, looking down the empty street again. The wind picked up, sending a tumbleweed rolling past. Already, Caleb could taste dust in the air. The storm would hit within the hour. "Pete, you best get going," Caleb said. The driver needed no further encouragement. Within minutes, the stagecoach was disappearing down the road, leaving Evelyn Ross standing alone with her trunk and fading hopes. "Perhaps he's been delayed," she said, more to herself than to Caleb. "His letter said he would meet me. He was very specific about the date." Caleb had lived in Dry Creek for 7 years, been sheriff for the last 3. He'd learned to read people like most folks read books. This young woman was trying hard to maintain her dignity, but he could see the fear creeping in around the edges. A woman alone in a frontier town. No money to speak of. He'd bet his badge she'd spent everything just getting here, and now abandoned by the man who'd promised her a new life. "Miss Ross," he said gently, "that storm's going to hit hard and fast. Let me help you get your things somewhere safe. We can sort out the rest after." "I couldn't impose," she said automatically, though her eyes darted nervously to the approaching wall of dust. It's no imposition. It's my job to look after folks in Dry Creek. He bent to lift her trunk, grunting slightly at the weight. Come on, my office is just across the way. We'll wait out the storm there. He'd taken 3 steps when he heard the laughter from the Silver Dollar Saloon. Through the bar's open doors, he could see James Dodd holding court at a table, a whiskey in his hand and that satisfied smirk on his face that Caleb had always wanted to wipe off with his fist. Dodd glanced toward the street, saw them, and his smirk widened. Evelyn had seen him too. Her face went pale beneath the trail dust. That's Mr. Dodd. Yes, ma'am, it is. He's right there. He can see me. Yes, ma'am. Her hands trembled as she clutched her carpetbag tighter. I don't understand. Caleb set down the trunk and faced her squarely. Miss Ross, I think you best come with me now. That storm won't wait for anyone's hurt feelings. But Evelyn Ross had more spine than he'd given her credit for. She lifted her chin and walked straight toward the saloon. Caleb cursed under his breath and followed, ready to intervene if needed. She stopped in the doorway, a small, travel-worn figure silhouetted against the dim interior. Mr. Dodd. The saloon quieted. James Dodd set down his whiskey with deliberate slowness and stood. He was a man running to fat, with pomaded hair and clothes too fine for Dry Creek. His pale eyes swept over Evelyn with the same calculating look he might give a horse he was considering buying. Well, well, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. The Missouri girl actually came. He laughed, and several of his companions joined in. Gentlemen, seems I've won our little wager. Evelyn's voice was steady despite everything. I don't understand. Your letters, you said... My letters said what needed saying to get you here. Dodd interrupted. But between the writing and your arrival, I've had word from a friend in Independence. Seems you're not quite the virtuous woman you presented yourself to be. Miss Ross, something about a certain incident with a traveling salesman. The color drained from Evelyn's face. That's not... You don't understand. I understand plenty, Dodd said, his voice carrying the satisfied tone of a man enjoying his cruelty. I'm a respectable businessman. I can't have a wife with a reputation. You understand. But I have nowhere. I spent everything to come here. Dodd shrugged. Not my concern. Should have thought of that before you tried to deceive an honest man. Caleb had heard enough. He stepped past Evelyn into the saloon. Dodd! The merchant's eyes narrowed. Sheriff, this is a private matter. Nothing's private when it's conducted in the middle of the Silver Dollar. Caleb kept his voice level, but his hand rested on his gun belt. The lady came here in good faith. The decent thing would be to at least pay her fare back home. The decent thing, Dodd laughed. She's the one who lied about her character. I don't owe her anything. In fact, she owes me for the embarrassment. Behind him, Caleb heard a small sound. Not quite a sob, but close. When he glanced back, Evelyn was gone. Through the doorway, he could see her walking unsteadily down the street, leaving her trunk behind, the carpetbag clutched to her chest like armor. The storm hit moments later. Caleb found her huddled in the narrow alley between the Methodist church and the schoolhouse, trying to shelter from the driving sand and dust. The wind howled like a living thing, turning the air brown and thick. He had to shout to be heard. Miss Ross, you can't stay out here. She looked up at him, and the despair in her eyes hit him like a physical blow. It was a look he'd seen before, in his own mirror, 3 years ago, when the fever had taken his wife and infant son in the space of a single, hellish week. Without waiting for permission, he pulled her to her feet and guided her through the storm. His small house sat at the edge of town, sturdy adobe walls built to withstand whatever the desert threw at it. Next to it stood a smaller structure, a cabin he'd built meaning to rent it out but never had. He fumbled with the cabin door, finally getting it open. and pushed her gently inside. The sudden cessation of wind was almost shocking. Evelyn stood in the middle of the single room, shaking, dust coating every inch of her. "Stay here," Caleb said. "I'll get your trunk." "Don't," she said, her voice hollow. "It doesn't matter." "It matters," he said firmly, and headed back into the storm. By the time he returned with her trunk and some supplies from his own house, she'd sunk onto the room's single chair, looking lost. He lit the oil lamp, casting warm light over the sparse furnishings. A bed, a table, the chair, and a small stove. "This was meant for my hired hand," he said, setting down an armload of blankets and a basket of food. "But I've been managing alone. You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow, when the storm's passed, we'll figure out what to do." She looked up at him, confusion replacing some of the despair. "Why are you helping me?" It was a fair question. Caleb considered his answer. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally, "and because I know what it's like to have your world torn apart." He showed her how to work the stove, where the water pump was, left her with enough food for a few days. At the door, he paused. "That story Dodd mentioned. I don't care if it's true or not. Man who'd abandon a woman like he did isn't worth defending. You're safe here. Miss Ross, that's all that matters right now." He left before she could reply, walking the short distance to his own house through the gradually calming storm. Inside, he poured himself a whiskey and stood at his window, watching the lamp glow in the cabin window. Evelyn Ross, a name he'd never heard before today, attached to a woman who'd shown more courage in facing down James Dodd than most men would have. Whatever had driven her to answer a mail-order bride advertisement, whatever desperation or hope had brought her to Dry Creek, she deserved better than what she'd found. The storm finally died as full darkness fell. Caleb could see stars beginning to peek through the dissipating dust clouds. Tomorrow, the town would be buzzing with gossip. The sheriff had taken in Dodd's rejected bride. There would be talk, speculation, judgment. Let them talk, Caleb thought. He'd been the subject of whispers ever since Margaret and little Thomas had died, leaving him a hollow man going through the motions of living. What was one more story for the gossips to chew over? In the cabin, he could see Evelyn's silhouette moving past the window. She was probably wondering what tomorrow would bring, just as he was. The difference was, she had no choice but to face it. He, at least, had the comfort of his routines, his duties, his carefully constructed walls against feeling too much. But something about today had cracked those walls just a little. Maybe it was the way she'd walked into that saloon with her head high. Maybe it was the familiar pain he'd seen in her eyes. Or maybe he was just tired of being alone with his ghosts. Whatever the reason, Caleb Hart, sheriff of Dry Creek, had made a choice. He'd offered shelter to a stranger, knowing full well the complications it would bring. In a frontier town where reputation meant everything and gossip spread faster than wildfire, he'd just painted a target on both their backs. The wind picked up again, rattling his windows, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Somewhere out in the desert, coyotes began their evening chorus. Caleb finished his whiskey and prepared for bed, already knowing sleep would be elusive. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. James Dodd wouldn't let this insult pass without response. The good people of Dry Creek would have opinions about propriety and scandal. And Evelyn Ross would have to decide what came next in a life that had veered far from whatever path she'd imagined. But tonight, she was safe. That had to count for something. In a hard land that broke more people than it made. Sometimes the small kindnesses were all that stood between a person and despair. Caleb blew out his lamp and lay down fully clothed, his gun within easy reach. Old habits died hard for a lawman. Even in his own home, through his window, he could still see the faint glow from the cabin. He'd told Evelyn Ross he knew what it was like to have your world torn apart. What he hadn't said was that sometimes, in the ruins, you found unexpected things. Strength you didn't know you had, people who understood your pain, maybe even a reason to keep going when everything in you wanted to quit. The desert night deepened, wrapping Dry Creek in its vast silence, and in a small cabin at the edge of town, a woman faced her first night in a new world that had already proven crueler than she'd imagined. While next door, a man who'd thought his heart was buried with his family discovered it still had room for compassion. Neither of them could have guessed that this strange, dust storm meeting would change everything, but the desert had its own plans, and tomorrow would come whether they were ready or not. The morning sun had barely crested the mountains when Caleb heard the knock on his door. He'd been awake for an hour already, drinking coffee and watching the cabin where Evelyn Ross had spent her first night in Dry Creek. The lamp in her window had burned late into the night. Deputy Tom Garrett stood on his porch, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "Morning, Sheriff. Thought you should know. Dodd's been making noise at the Silver Dollar. Says you overstepped yesterday." Caleb sipped his coffee. Man's entitled to his opinions. "He's saying more than opinions," Tom said carefully. "He's telling folks that the Ross woman is He cleared his throat. "Well, that she's not fit for decent society. Says he's got a letter from some shopkeeper in Independence that proves it." "What kind of proof?" "Says she was caught in a compromising situation with a traveling salesman. Dodd's showing the letter around, making sure everyone knows why he rejected her." Caleb set down his cup harder than necessary. Through his window, he could see Evelyn emerging from the cabin, shading her eyes against the morning glare. She'd cleaned the dust from her dress as best she could, fixed her hair properly, even from a distance. He could see the determined set of her shoulders. "Tom, I want you to do something for me," Caleb said. "Wire the sheriff in Independence. Ask about any incidents involving a Miss Evelyn Ross and a traveling salesman. Get me facts, not gossip." Tom nodded. "You thinking Dodd's lying?" "I'm thinking Dodd orchestrated this whole thing for some reason. Man doesn't reject a mail-order bride in public like that without an agenda." After Tom left, Caleb walked over to the cabin. Evelyn was attempting to draw water from the pump, struggling with the handle that always stuck. "You have to lift and pull at the same time," he said, demonstrating. "Thing's older than dirt and twice as stubborn." "Thank you." She filled a bucket, not meeting his eyes. "Sheriff Hart, I need to ask, is there work to be had in town? I can cook, clean, take in laundry. I need to earn enough for passage back to Missouri." "What's waiting for you there?" She was quiet for a moment. "Nothing, really, but I can't stay here." "Because of what Dodd said." Her chin lifted slightly. "Because I won't be a burden or an object of pity." Caleb studied her. In daylight, he could see more clearly what the dust and despair had hidden yesterday. She had a strong face, not beautiful in the conventional sense, but striking. There was steel in her spine despite everything. "Can you read and write well?" "Yes, of course." "How's your arithmetic?" "I kept the books for my father's hardware store before he died. The town council's been after me to hire someone to help with paperwork, taxes, records, that sort of thing. Pays not much dollar a day, but it's honest work." Hope flickered in her eyes before caution tamped it down. "People will talk." "People are already talking," Caleb said bluntly. "Question is whether you want to earn your way home or sit in that cabin feeling sorry for yourself." A flash of temper replaced the caution. "I've never felt sorry for myself a day in my life, Sheriff Hart." "Good. Then be at my office at 8 sharp. And Miss Ross, wear something you don't mind getting dusty. 3 months of filing hasn't done itself." He left her standing by the pump, aware he'd just complicated his life considerably. But there'd been something in her eyes when she'd mentioned her father's store, pride mixed with loss. He recognized that look. It was the same one that stared back at him from every mirror. At 5 minutes to 8, Evelyn appeared at the sheriff's office. She'd changed into a simpler dress, brown calico that had seen better days but was clean and pressed. Caleb was already at his desk, sorting through a stack of wanted posters. "I appreciate this opportunity," she began formally. "Save the speeches," he said. gesturing to a second desk buried under papers. That mess is 3 months of tax records, property disputes, and incident reports. Make sense of it. She surveyed the chaos without flinching. Do you have a system for filing? If I had a system, would it look like that? The tiniest smile tugged at her mouth, the first he'd seen from her. Fair point. They worked in companionable silence for an hour before the door burst open. James Dodd filled the doorway, face flushed with anger and probably whiskey despite the early hour. Hart, he said, ignoring Evelyn entirely. We need to talk. I'm listening. Not here. Outside. Man to man. Caleb stood slowly. Whatever you have to say, you can say it here. Miss Ross is my employee now. Your employee? Dodd's laugh was ugly. That what we're calling it? Yes, Caleb said evenly. That's what we're calling it. Now state your business or move along. Dodd's face darkened. You've got no right keeping that woman here. She came to town under false pretenses, lying about her character. I've got proof. He pulled a folded letter from his pocket, waving it like a weapon. Letter from Samuel Morrison. Owns the Morrison Dry Goods in Independence. Says she was caught with a traveling salesman in the storeroom after hours. Shameful behavior. Sheriff, not fitting for our Christian community. Evelyn had gone very still, her face pale but composed. Caleb held out his hand. Let me see this letter. Dodd handed it over reluctantly. Caleb read it carefully, noting the date, the handwriting, the specific wording. Something felt off about it, though he couldn't put his finger on what. Miss Ross, he said without looking at her. Is Samuel Morrison a real person? Yes, her voice was steady. He owns the store next to where my father's was. And this incident he describes. She took a breath. A man came into the store after closing. I was doing inventory. He made advances. Mr. Morrison heard me scream and came to help. That's all. That's all, Dodd scoffed. Morrison says different. Then Morrison is mistaken or lying. Evelyn said quietly. The salesman tore my sleeve, trying to grab me. Mr. Morrison threw him out. I thought he understood what really happened. Caleb folded the letter and pocketed it. I'll be keeping this. That's my property, Dodd protested. It's evidence now, Caleb said. Evidence in what's looking more and more like a conspiracy to defame an innocent woman. You might want to think about that. Dodd. The merchant's eyes narrowed. You threatening me? Sheriff, I'm doing my job, protecting the citizens of Dry Creek, all of them. She's not a citizen. She's a nobody who came here chasing promises she didn't deserve. That's where you're wrong, Caleb said, stepping closer to Dodd. The moment she set foot in this town, she became my responsibility, and I take my responsibilities seriously. Dodd backed toward the door. This isn't over. Hart, you're making a mistake, standing up for trash like her, when the good people of this town find out what you're harboring. Get out, Caleb said softly. Now. After Dodd left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Caleb turned to find Evelyn gripping the edge of the desk, knuckles white. It wasn't like he said, she whispered. I swear to you. I know, Caleb said simply. She looked up, surprised. You believe me? I've been sheriff here for 3 years. Miss Ross, I've learned to tell when someone's lying. You're not. Dodd, on the other hand, couldn't tell the truth if his life depended on it. She sank into her chair. Why would Mr. Morrison write such a letter? I thought he was a friend of my father's. Money has a way of changing friendships, Caleb said. How much do you think Dodd paid him? The idea seemed to shock her. But why? Why go to such trouble to humiliate me? That was the question, wasn't it? Caleb moved to the window, watching the morning traffic on Main Street. Dry Creek was waking up, shopkeepers opening their doors, ranch hands loading supplies, women heading to market. Normal life carrying on, unaware of the small drama playing out in the sheriff's office. "What can you tell me about your correspondence with Dodd?" he asked. "How did it start?" Evelyn composed herself, hands folded carefully in her lap. "I placed an advertisement in the Matrimonial Times. My situation in Independence had become difficult after Father died. The store had debts, and She paused. "A woman alone has few options. Sheriff," when Mr. Dodd responded. He seemed perfect, established, respectable, offering a real home. "How many letters did you exchange?" "Dozens. He was quite persistent, very eager for me to come quickly. He even sent extra money for first-class passage. Said he couldn't wait to start our life together." Caleb frowned. That didn't sound like the James Dodd he knew, a man who squeezed every penny until it screamed. "Do you still have those letters?" "In my trunk." "I'd like to see them." She stood. "I'll fetch them now." "We'll go together," Caleb said. "After yesterday, I don't want you walking alone." They made the short walk to the cabin, Caleb noting the curtains twitching in windows as they passed. By noon, everyone would know the sheriff had been seen escorting the Ross woman. Let them talk. Evelyn's trunk was neatly organized, everything in its place despite yesterday's upheaval. She pulled out a bundle of letters tied with string and handed them to him. Back at the office, Caleb read through them while Evelyn returned to sorting files. The letters were eloquent, passionate even, painting a picture of domestic bliss that seemed entirely out of character for James Dodd. The handwriting was Dodd's. Caleb had seen it enough on legal documents. But the words, "Miss Ross, did Dodd ever mention having help writing these?" She looked up from her work. "No." "Why?" "Because unless I miss my guess, James Dodd didn't write these letters. He copied them. The question is, from what?" He pulled out a magnifying glass, studying the papers more closely. There, so faint he'd almost missed it, were indentations of different writing underneath. Someone had written these letters first in pencil, and Dodd had traced over them in ink. "Son of a—" He caught himself. "Sorry, ma'am. What is it?" "These letters were written by someone else first. Dodd just copied them." He set down the magnifying glass. "This whole thing was planned from the start. But why?" A commotion outside interrupted his thoughts. Tom Garrett burst in, breathing hard. "Sheriff, we got trouble. That family of homesteaders out by Coyote Creek, the Millers, their well's been poisoned. All their stock is dead." Caleb grabbed his hat. "When?" "Sometime last night, old man Miller rode in half dead himself. Barely made it to Doc Peterson's." "Miss Ross, I have to go," Caleb said, already checking his guns. "Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone except Tom or me." "I can help," she said, "if people are sick." "No, you stay here." He paused at the door. "And Miss Ross, start making a list of every business deal Dodd's been involved in lately. Every property he's bought, every loan he's made. I've got a feeling this is all connected." He rode out with Tom and 2 other deputies, the morning sun already brutal on their backs. The Miller homestead was 8 miles out, good bottomland near the creek that several folks had had their eyes on. The scene that greeted them was grim. Dead cattle bloated in the sun, chickens scattered like feathered stones around the well. The family's dog lay nearest to the water bucket, foam dried around its muzzle. "Strychnine," Caleb said after examining the well. "Enough to kill everything that drank." "Who'd do such a thing?" Tom asked. Caleb didn't answer, but his mind was working. The Miller property bordered land that James Dodd had been trying to buy for months. If the Millers were forced off... "Tom, ride back to town. I want you to check the land records. See who's made offers on this property recently. And Tom, keep an eye on Miss Ross. Something tells me she's in more danger than she knows." As Tom rode off, Caleb stood by the poisoned well, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to form in his mind. Dodd's elaborate scheme to bring Evelyn here and publicly humiliate her, the conveniently timed poisoning of the Miller's well, the letter from Morrison that felt too neat, too damning. What if Evelyn Ross wasn't just a discarded mail-order bride? What if she was meant to be a distraction? A scandal to keep the sheriff busy while Dodd made his move on the Miller land create. Enough drama, enough gossip, and nobody would notice a poisoned well until it was too late. But Dodd had made one mistake. He'd assumed Caleb would react like any other man, either turn Evelyn away in moral outrage or be so taken with her that he'd lose focus on his duties. Instead, Caleb had done neither, and now Dodd was scrambling, making mistakes. The sun climbed higher as Caleb investigated the scene, gathering evidence. By the time he headed back to town, he was certain of two things: James Dodd was more dangerous than anyone suspected, and Evelyn Ross was in the middle of something that could get her killed. The afternoon shadows were lengthening when he finally returned to his office. Evelyn was still there, the chaos of papers now organized into neat stacks. She'd made coffee, and the familiar smell hit him with unexpected comfort. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked. "Found more than I was looking for," he said, accepting the cup she offered. "Miss Ross, I need to ask you something, and I need the absolute truth. Did Dodd ever mention the Miller property in his letters or any other land deals?" She thought carefully. "No, never. He only talked about our future home, the life we'd build together. He was very romantic." "Not a word usually associated with James Dodd," Caleb muttered. He pulled out a map of the county, spreading it on his desk. "Look here. The Miller property sits right between Dodd's current holdings and the new railroad spur that's coming through next year. With that land, he'd control water rights for half the valley." Understanding dawned in her eyes. And he needed a distraction. A scandal big enough to keep everyone busy while he forced the Millers out. Caleb met her gaze. "I'm sorry. Miss Ross, you were brought here to be a pawn in Dodd's game." She was quiet for a long moment, then lifted her chin with that steel he was beginning to admire. "Then perhaps it's time this pawn became a queen." "What do you have in mind?" "You said you wanted a list of Dodd's business dealings. I found something else while organizing your files." She pulled out a ledger. "Tax records. Mr. Dodd has been very creative with his numbers. Creative enough to interest a federal marshal, I think." Caleb studied the entries she'd marked. Sure enough, the discrepancies were clear once you knew what to look for. "How did you spot this?" "I told you I kept books for my father. I know when numbers don't add up." She paused. "Sheriff Hart, I won't be run out of another town by lies. If Mr. Dodd wants a fight, I'll give him one." Looking at her, dusty dress, determined eyes, chin raised in defiance, Caleb felt something shift in his chest. For 3 years, he'd gone through the motions of living, doing his duty but feeling nothing. Now, faced with this woman's courage, he remembered what it felt like to care about more than just getting through another day. "All right, Miss Ross," he said. "We'll give him a fight. But you need to know, Dodd's already killed for that land. He won't hesitate to kill again." "Then we'd better make sure he doesn't get the chance," she said simply. Outside, the sun was setting over Dry Creek, painting the desert in shades of orange and red. Somewhere out there, James Dodd was probably making his next move, confident that his plan was working. He had no idea that in a dusty sheriff's office, a lawman with nothing left to lose and a woman with everything to prove were about to turn his game against him. The first light of dawn found Evelyn already at the water pump, filling buckets for what had become her morning routine. 2 weeks had passed since Caleb had hired her, and she'd settled into a rhythm that almost felt like belonging. Almost. "Miss Evelyn," a small voice called out, and she turned to see young Sally Martinez running toward her, pigtails bouncing. Behind her, slower and more careful, came her brother Miguel, carrying baby Anna. "Good morning, you three," Evelyn said, setting down her bucket. These were the Martinez orphans. Their parents had died of fever last spring, leaving them in the care of whoever in Dry Creek had room and kindness to spare. Lately, that had been Caleb. though he'd never admit to the kindness part. "Sheriff Hart said you might teach us letters today," Sally announced, brown eyes hopeful. "He said you write real pretty." Evelyn glanced toward Caleb's house, where lamplight still glowed in the kitchen window. The man barely slept. She'd noticed, between investigating Dodd's schemes and caring for the steady stream of children who found their way to his door, he seemed to run on coffee and stubbornness alone. "Did he now?" she said, smoothing Sally's hair. "Well, I suppose we could practice a bit after breakfast. Have you eaten?" Miguel shook his head, shifting the baby on his hip. At 12, he was trying so hard to be the man of his small family. Sheriff Hart left early, said something about checking on the widow Patterson's place. Evelyn's heart sank. Martha Patterson's small ranch bordered Dodd's land, another strategic piece in his expanding empire. If Caleb had gone there this early— "Come on then," she said briskly. "Let's get you fed." She led them into the cabin, which had transformed in 2 weeks from a bare shelter to something approaching a home. She'd sewn curtains from fabric bought with her first wages, added a rag rug, and kept wildflowers in a jar on the table. Small touches, but they made her feel less like a refugee and more like someone who might stay a while. As she prepared flapjacks and bacon, the children chattered about their adventures. Sally had found a horned toad. Miguel had been practicing with the slingshot Caleb had made him. Baby Anna, barely 2, contributed babbled observations that her siblings translated with solemn authority. "Sheriff Hart's teaching me to trek," Miguel said proudly. "Says I got natural talent. Maybe I could be a deputy someday." "I'm sure you'd make a fine deputy," Evelyn said, flipping a flapjack. "Though you might want to finish learning your numbers first. Even lawmen need arithmetic." "That's what he said too," Miguel admitted reluctantly. They were halfway through breakfast when hoofbeats thundered up to the cabin. Evelyn rushed to the window, relaxing when she saw Caleb dismounting, but her relief faded when she saw his expression. "Stay here with the children," she told Miguel, then stepped outside. Caleb's shirt was torn, dust and what looked like blood staining the sleeve. His face was grim. "Martha Patterson's dead," he said without preamble. "Made to look like she fell from her horse, but I found boot prints that say otherwise." Evelyn's hand went to her throat. "Dodd?" "Can't prove it yet, but her son signed over the ranch to pay debts to Dodd's store not an hour after we found her body. Convenient timing." He ran a hand through his hair, and she noticed his knuckles were scraped. "I need to warn the other smallholders. This is escalating faster than I expected." "You're hurt," she said, reaching for his arm. He pulled back. "It's nothing. Listen, I need you to take the children to the church. Father Miguel will keep them safe while—" "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "I mean, they're safe here. Safer with us than anywhere else. You said yourself Dodd's getting desperate. He might—" She stopped, aware the children could be listening. "They need stability. Caleb, being shuffled around again won't help." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and they both noticed. A moment stretched between them, loaded with unspoken things. "All right," he said finally. "But I'm posting Tom outside, and you don't go anywhere alone." She nodded, then gentled her voice. "Let me look at that arm." This time, he didn't pull away. She led him inside, where the children greeted him with enthusiasm tempered by concern. While Sally distracted the younger ones with a story, Evelyn cleaned and bandaged the gash on Caleb's forearm. "You were in a fight," she said quietly, noting the defensive wounds. "2 of Dodd's men were still at the Patterson place. Tried to convince me I hadn't seen what I'd seen." His jaw tightened. "I convinced them otherwise. And Martha's son, Pete Patterson's been drinking heavy since his ma took sick last winter. Owes money all over town. Most of it to Dodd's store at interest rates that'd make a banker blush. Dodd probably promised to forgive the debts in exchange for the deed." Evelyn tied off the bandage, her movements gentle but efficient. "We need more proof," something that ties him directly to these crimes. "We need to keep you safe," Caleb countered. "You've been helping me investigate, and Dodd knows it. That makes you a target." "I've been a target since I stepped off that stage," she reminded him. "At least now I know why." Sally piped up from across the room. "Are you and Miss Evelyn getting married?" The question hung in suddenly thick air. Miguel hushed his sister, but the damage was done. "Sally, that's not—" Evelyn began. "'Cause Tommy Morrison says you're sweet on each other, and his ma says it ain't proper. You living so close without being married. But I told him you're not living together, just next door. And besides, Sheriff Hart's too sad since Mrs. Margaret died to be sweet on anybody. But you make him less sad. So maybe—" "Sally," Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. "That's enough chatter. Why don't you show Miss Evelyn how well you can write your name?" The little girl beamed and scrambled for the slate Evelyn had been using to teach them. But the questions she'd raised lingered in the room like smoke from the stove. After Caleb left to continue his rounds, Evelyn settled into teaching the children. It was a welcome distraction from the morning's grim news and the uncomfortable awareness Sally's innocent words had stirred. She'd been careful to maintain proper distance from Caleb, grateful for his protection but mindful of appearances. But somewhere in the last 2 weeks, between shared coffee at dawn and whispered conferences over Dodd's ledgers, that distance had shrunk. The day wore on with a deceptive peace. Tom Garrett took up position outside, whittling and watching. The children practiced their letters, helped with chores, and played quietly when baby Anna napped. It was almost possible to forget the danger lurking at the edges of their small sanctuary. Then, as afternoon shadows lengthened, Father Miguel arrived. The elderly priest looked troubled, his usually cheerful face drawn with worry. "Miss Ross," he said, accepting her offer of coffee. "I've come with a warning. Some of the town ladies are planning to pay you a visit. They're concerned about the propriety of your situation." Evelyn's stomach clenched. "I see." "Led by Mrs. Prudence Weatherby. I'm afraid she feels it's her Christian duty to offer you guidance." His tone made it clear what kind of guidance that would be. "When?" "Tomorrow, after the church social. I tried to dissuade them, but—" He spread his hands helplessly. "Perhaps if you attended the social yourself, showed them you're a respectable woman." Evelyn almost laughed. Respectable women didn't answer mail-order bride advertisements, didn't work for unmarried men, didn't live alone on the edge of town with a reputation already in tatters. But she kept these thoughts to herself. "Thank you for the warning, Father." After he left, she found herself pacing the small cabin while the children napped. The walls seemed to close in, the careful order she'd created suddenly fragile as spider's silk. One visit from the town's moral guardians could shatter everything. Her job, her shelter, her growing connection to this place and these people. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. She opened the door to find Caleb, looking as tired as she felt. "Tom told me about Father Miguel's visit," he said. "I'm sorry. This is my fault. I should have found you lodging in town, with a respectable family." "And which respectable family would have taken in Dodd's discarded bride?" she asked. "No, you did what was right and kind. I won't have you apologizing for it." He studied her for a long moment. "You could leave. I have enough saved to buy you passage back east, or to California if you prefer. Somewhere you could start fresh without all this hanging over you." The offer hit her like a physical blow. Was that what he wanted for her to leave? "Is that what you think I should do?" she asked carefully. "I think—" He stopped, removed his hat, ran his fingers through dust-colored hair. "I think you deserve better than fighting my battles and facing judgment from people who don't know the first thing about you." "They're not just your battles," she said. "Not anymore. Dodd tried to use me, to make me nothing but a pawn in his schemes. I won't run and let him win." "Pride's a cold comfort if you're dead," he said bluntly. "So is safety if you're alone." she shot back. The words hung between them, heavier than intended. Through the window, she could see the children starting to stir from their naps. There might be another way, Caleb said slowly, to protect your reputation and keep you safe, but you might not like it. Tell me. Marry me. The words dropped into the space between them like stones in still water. Evelyn couldn't breathe. Not a real marriage, he continued quickly. A legal arrangement? For protection, the town ladies can't condemn a married woman for living with her husband. And Dodd would think twice about targeting my wife. Your wife, she repeated numbly. In name only, you'd have the protection of my name, my badge. When this is over, when Dodd's dealt with, we can quietly divorce. You'll be a respectable widow woman then. My first wife's death is well known. No scandal in a widower remarrying briefly and it not working out. It was all so logical, so carefully thought out. A business arrangement to solve a practical problem, so why did it make her chest ache? I need to think, she managed. Of course, but Evelyn... He used her given name deliberately, softly. Those women tomorrow won't give you time to think. They'll come with their righteousness and their condemnation, and they'll try to drive you out. I've seen them do it before. She knew he was right. In a frontier town, respectability was currency, and hers was already bankrupt. Marriage to the sheriff, even a marriage of convenience, would give her standing, protection, purpose. What about you? She asked. What do you gain from this arrangement? He was quiet for a long moment. Peace of mind, he said finally. Knowing you're safe. Knowing the children have someone to care for them when I can't. Knowing... He stopped, shook his head. Just think about it. After he left, Evelyn stood in her tidy cabin, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Through the window, she could see Caleb walking back to his house, shoulders bent with burdens he never spoke of. In 2 weeks, this man had shown her more genuine kindness than she'd known in years. He'd offered her work, shelter, dignity. Now he was offering his name, the most valuable thing a man could give in this harsh land. The children woke hungry and full of energy as she prepared supper and helped with lessons. Evelyn turned Caleb's proposal over in her mind. A marriage of convenience. A practical solution to a practical problem. No expectations, no demands. Just mutual benefit and shared purpose. So why did the thought of it being temporary make her heart twist? That night, after the children were tucked into their bedrolls, they'd taken to sleeping at her cabin more often than not. Evelyn sat by lamplight, mending one of Miguel's shirts. The ordinary task couldn't quiet her racing thoughts. She'd come to Dry Creek expecting to be a wife. Now she was being offered exactly that, just not in the way she'd imagined. No romance. No promises of forever, just survival and expedience. But hadn't that been what her arrangement with Dodd was supposed to be? At least Caleb was honest about his intentions. A sound outside made her freeze. Footsteps. Trying to be quiet. She reached for the rifle Caleb had insisted she keep close, then relaxed when she heard Tom Garrett's low challenge and a familiar voice respond. Caleb knocked softly. She opened the door to find him holding something wrapped in cloth. My mother's, he said simply, handing her the bundle. Thought you should have it. For tomorrow, whatever you decide. Inside the cloth was a cameo brooch, delicate and lovely. The kind of thing a sheriff's wife would wear to a church social. Caleb, don't answer now, he said. Sleep on it. But know this, I meant what I said. You deserve better than what this town's tried to make you. This is just my way of fighting back. He left before she could respond, disappearing into the darkness. Evelyn stood in her doorway, holding his mother's brooch, feeling the weight of more than just jewelry in her hands. Tomorrow, the good women of Dry Creek would come to pass judgment. Tomorrow, she would have to choose between running and standing her ground. Tomorrow, she might become Mrs. Caleb Hart, not for love but for survival. Tonight, though, She allowed herself to admit what she'd been fighting since that first dawn at the water pump, somewhere between the shared coffee and whispered conferences, between his gentle handling of orphaned children and his fierce protection of the innocent. She'd started falling for a man still in love with a ghost. The smart thing would be to run, take his money and find somewhere new to disappear. The practical thing would be to accept his proposal and weather the storm with legal protection. But Evelyn Ross had never been particularly good at doing the smart or practical thing. That's how she'd ended up in Dry Creek in the first place. As she prepared for bed, checking on the sleeping children one last time, she made her decision. Tomorrow, when the righteous women came calling, she would meet them as herself, not as Dodd's discarded bride or Caleb's convenient wife, but as Evelyn Ross, a woman with her own strength and her own worth. And if that wasn't enough for Dry Creek, then maybe it was the town that needed changing, not her. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows and bringing the scent of coming rain. A storm was building over the desert, and tomorrow it would break. But tonight, in a small cabin at the edge of town, a woman held a dead mother's brooch and dared to dream of a different kind of future, one where convenience might grow into something more, where protection could become partnership, where a marriage begun in necessity might find its way to love. It was a dangerous dream in a dangerous land. But then again, Evelyn Ross had already proven she wasn't afraid of a little danger. The storm hit just after midnight, turning the desert into a chaos of wind and sand. Evelyn woke to the sound of something banging against the cabin wall, and Sally crying in fear. Lightning illuminated the room in stark flashes as she comforted the children, pulling them close while the walls shook. "It's just a storm," she soothed, though her own heart raced. These desert storms were different from the thunderstorms she'd known in Missouri, fiercer, more primal. A crack of thunder coincided with her door bursting open. Caleb stood there, soaked from the sudden downpour that followed the dust. "The Henderson place is on fire," he shouted over the wind. "Lightning strike! I need you to keep the children here. Lock the door, and don't open it for anyone but me or Tom." Before she could respond, he was gone, through the window. She could see riders heading out into the storm, volunteers racing to fight the fire before it spread. In a drought-stricken land, fire was everyone's enemy. The children huddled closer. Miguel tried to be brave. "I should go help," he said, though his voice shook. "Your job is here," Evelyn said firmly. "Protecting your sisters. Sheriff Hart is counting on you." The boy straightened at that, taking his responsibility seriously. They waited out the storm together, Evelyn telling stories to distract the younger ones while keeping one ear attuned to sounds outside. The rifle lay across her lap, loaded and ready. Dawn came gray and waterlogged, the storm having blown itself out. Evelyn had just started breakfast when she heard horses approaching. Through the window, she saw Caleb returning with several men, all of them smoke-blackened and exhausted. She met him at the door with coffee. His hands shook slightly as he took the cup from cold or exhaustion. She couldn't tell. "The Hendersons?" she asked quietly. "Safe. Lost the barn and some livestock, but the house survived." He drained the coffee in 3 gulps. "Wasn't lightning, though. Someone said it." Her blood chilled. "Dot?" "Has to be. The Hendersons were planning to testify about his price-fixing scheme at the territorial court next month." He rubbed his eyes. "I need to wash up and get back out there. The Matthews and Clearwater families need warning. They're next on his list." "Caleb, you're dead on your feet. People are counting on me." "And you're no good to them if you collapse." She touched his arm gently. "Rest for an hour. Tom and the others can start the warnings. You'll think clearer after some food and sleep." He looked like he might argue. Then his shoulders sagged. 1 hour. She guided him inside, where the children were finishing breakfast. They gazed at him with hero worship clear in their eyes. To them, he was larger than life. The sheriff who fought fires and bad men with equal determination. While he washed up, Evelyn prepared a proper meal. The simple domesticity of it, cooking while children chattered and a good man rested under her roof, stirred something deep in her chest. This was what she'd dreamed of when she'd answered that advertisement. Not the grand romance Dodd's letters had promised, but this purposeful work, grateful hearts, a place where she mattered. Caleb emerged looking marginally more human, though exhaustion still lined his face. He ate mechanically while reviewing plans with Tom Garrett, who'd arrived to coordinate the day's efforts. "I'll take the North Circuit," Tom was saying. "Warn the smallholders out that way. You take the South." "I'm going with him," Evelyn interrupted. Both men looked at her in surprise. "Evelyn, no," Caleb started. "You need someone watching your back. Tom needs to cover the North, and your other deputies are still fighting spot fires. I can shoot. My father taught me. And I know Dodd's business practices better than anyone except him. I might spot something you'd miss." "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous." "Everything's dangerous now," she countered. "Staying here alone with the children while you're gone, dangerous. Going to town where Dodd's men can corner me, dangerous. At least with you. I'd have protection." "She has a point. Sheriff," Tom said carefully, "and if Dodd's escalating this fast, might be good to have someone who can identify his paper trails at each property." Caleb's jaw worked as he fought internal battles. "Finally, you stay on your horse. You do exactly as I say. First sign of trouble, you ride hard back here." Agreed. An hour later, they set out under clearing skies. The storm had left the desert transformed. What had been dusty brown was now painted in fresh colors. Wildflowers already pushing up through the sand. It would have been beautiful if not for the smoke still rising from the Henderson property in the distance. They rode in companionable silence at first, checking on the scattered homesteads. At each stop, Evelyn watched Caleb work. Calm, authoritative, caring. He knew every family, every struggle, every strength. This wasn't just duty for him. These were his people. At the Clearwater place, while Caleb spoke with the family, Evelyn noticed something odd about their ledger. "Mr. Clearwater," she called. "Have you been selling your grain to Dodd's store?" The man nodded nervously. "Past 2 seasons. He offered better prices than anyone else." "And these receipts, did you notice the weights are different from what you recorded delivering?" Clearwater frowned. Studying the papers, his face darkened. "That snake's been shorting me near 20%. "More than that," Evelyn said, calculating quickly. "He's been buying low, recording even lower, then selling at premium prices and keeping the difference. I'd wager every farmer he's bought from has similar discrepancies." Caleb looked at her with something like admiration. "Can you prove it?" "With access to his store ledgers, absolutely." "Then we'll get them," Caleb said grimly. "Legal warrant from Judge Patterson, Martha's brother. He's been looking for a reason to go after Dodd since her death." They made 3 more stops, Evelyn documenting fraud at each one. The pattern was clear. Dodd had been systematically cheating the smallholders for years, building his fortune on their backs while positioning himself to buy their land when they inevitably couldn't pay their debts. The sun was high when they reached the last homestead, a small place backed up against a box canyon, belonging to a widow named Beth Carver and her 3 children. Caleb tensed as they approached. Something's wrong. No smoke from the chimney, no movement in the yard. They found Beth Carver tied up in a root cellar, gagged but alive. Her children were locked in the smokehouse. As Caleb freed them, Beth gasped out her story. 3 men had come at dawn, said they were collecting on her debts to Dodd. "They took the deed," she sobbed. "Made me sign it over. Said they'd hurt my babies if I didn't." "Can you identify them?" Caleb asked gently. "One for certain. Jake Morrison. Works as Dodd's collector sometimes." Caleb's face went hard. "You're safe now. We'll get your land back." As they helped the family recover, Evelyn noticed fresh wagon tracks leading into the canyon behind the house. "Caleb, what's back there?" "Old mine shaft. Been abandoned for years." He studied the tracks, frowning. "But these are recent. and heavy. They followed the tracks carefully, Caleb insisting Evelyn stay behind him. The canyon narrowed, walls rising steep and red. At its end, they found the mine entrance, but it was no longer abandoned. Fresh timber shored up the opening, and crates were stacked inside. Caleb investigated cautiously, then whistled low. Dynamite. Enough to blow half the mountain. What would Dodd want with dynamite? The railroad, Caleb said suddenly. The new spur is supposed to come through Grayson Pass, 10 miles north, but if the pass was blocked by a landslide, they'd have to reroute through the valley. Evelyn finished. Right through Dodd's accumulated properties. Making him the richest man in the territory. Caleb's hand went to his gun. We need to get out of here, now! But as they turned to leave, riders appeared at the canyon mouth. 5 men, led by Jake Morrison himself. Dodd sat his horse in the middle, looking pleased with himself. Sheriff Hart, Dodd called out. And the lovely Miss Ross. How fortuitous. You've saved me the trouble of hunting you down. It's over, Dodd, Caleb said calmly. We know about the dynamite, the railroad scheme, all of it. Do you? And who's going to tell anyone, a disgraced woman and a sheriff who's about to have a tragic accident? Dodd smiled coldly. You should have minded your own business. Hart stayed in your office playing with your orphans and your paperwork. Those men you hired to burn out the Hendersons, Caleb said. They're in custody, singing like church birds about who paid them. Judge Patterson's already signed warrants. Dodd's smile faltered, then hardened. Then I guess I've got nothing left to lose. The gunfight happened fast. Caleb shoved Evelyn behind a boulder as the first shots rang out. The canyon walls amplified the sound, turning it into thunder. Evelyn pressed against the rock. Her father's lessons coming back: stay low, stay calm, pick your targets. She saw Jake Morrison trying to flank them and fired, her shot catching him in the shoulder. He went down, cursing. Caleb was returning fire steadily, forcing Dodd's men to take cover. The dynamite! Evelyn shouted suddenly. If a bullet hits it... Caleb understood immediately. He grabbed her hand. Run! They sprinted for their horses as bullets whined past. Evelyn's mare was well trained, standing steady despite the chaos. She swung into the saddle as Caleb covered their retreat. They raced down the canyon, Dodd's men in pursuit. The narrow walls that had trapped them now worked in their favor. Only 2 riders could follow at a time. Caleb twisted in his saddle, firing back, while Evelyn focused on guiding her horse through the treacherous terrain. Then the world exploded. Whether a stray bullet hit the dynamite or Dodd's men set it off deliberately, Evelyn never knew. The blast knocked her from her horse, sent her tumbling into sand and sage. Her ears rang, dust and debris raining down. Evelyn Caleb's voice, distant through the ringing. Strong hands pulled her upright, checked her for injuries. Are you hurt? She shook her head, though everything spun. Behind them, the canyon was sealed by tons of fallen rock. No one would be following them. Dodd, she managed. Trapped on the other side, if he survived. Caleb's face was grim. Come on, we need to get you to Doc Peterson. The ride back to town blurred together. Evelyn clung to consciousness and her saddle with equal determination. By the time they reached Dry Creek, half the town had gathered, drawn by the distant explosion. Tom Garrett met them at the doctor's office. Sheriff, what happened? While Doc Peterson examined Evelyn's various cuts and bruises, Caleb explained. Judge Patterson himself arrived, still in his nightshirt, to hear the tale. I'll have every lawman in the territory out here by tomorrow. The judge declared, Dodd's reign of terror is over, but Evelyn barely heard him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her shaky and exhausted. Through it all, Caleb stayed close, his presence steady and reassuring. You saved our lives, he told her quietly while Doc Peterson worked. That shot at Morrison gave us the seconds we needed. We saved each other, she corrected. His hand found hers, gripped it tightly. Evelyn, when I saw you fall... I'm all right, she assured him, though her voice trembled. We're both all right. Doc Peterson finished his examination. Nothing broken, young lady, though you'll be sore for a week. You're lucky. Lucky? Evelyn almost laughed. She'd come to Dry Creek expecting marriage to a merchant and found instead violence, conspiracy, and a sheriff who made her heart race in entirely inappropriate ways. As they left the doctor's office, she found the town transformed. Word had spread about Dodd's schemes, about how the sheriff and that Ross woman had uncovered the plot and nearly died stopping it. The same faces that had shown suspicion now offered nods of respect, even approval. Mrs. Weatherby herself approached, the moral arbiter of Dry Creek, looking uncharacteristically humble. Miss Ross, I owe you an apology. I misjudged you terribly. Thank you, Evelyn said simply, too tired for anything more. Back at the cabin, the children waited anxiously. They threw themselves at both adults, tears and questions tumbling together. It took time to calm them, to assure them everyone was safe. Finally, with the children settled and the door locked against the night, Evelyn and Caleb sat on her small porch. The stars were coming out, brilliant in the clear desert air. Your proposal, Evelyn said suddenly. From last night. Caleb tensed. You don't need to answer that now. Things have changed. Dodd's finished. Your reputation's restored. You're free to make your own choices. Yes, she said, I am. She turned to face him fully. I choose to stay, not because I need protection or respectability, but because this is my home now. These children, this town, this work, it matters to me. Evelyn, and you, she continued, heart pounding. You matter to me, not as a protector or employer, but as more. So if you're still offering marriage, I'm accepting, but not as a business arrangement, not as convenience, as something real. In the starlight, she saw emotions chase across his weathered face. Surprise, hope, fear, and finally something that looked like joy. I buried my heart with Margaret and Thomas, he said roughly. Thought it was gone forever. Then you showed up with your courage and your ledgers and your way with the children. And I started feeling things I'd sworn never to feel again. Is that a yes? Instead of answering with words, he kissed her. Gentle at first, then deeper as 3 weeks of careful distance dissolved. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily. Evelyn saw tears on his face. That's a yes, he confirmed. In the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon. The desert night wrapped around them, vast and wild and full of possibilities. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Dodd's capture, legal proceedings, integration into a town that was still learning who Evelyn Ross really was. But tonight, sitting on a humble porch with a man who'd shown her what real partnership looked like, Evelyn felt something she hadn't experienced since stepping off that stagecoach piece. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and new. And in its wake, 2 damaged hearts had found their way to each other, ready to build something lasting in this harsh and beautiful land. The children will be thrilled, Caleb said eventually. Sally's been planning our wedding since the day she met you. Evelyn laughed. The sound bright in the darkness. Then we'd better not disappoint her. They sat together as the night deepened, hands linked, hearts full. Neither of them had expected this when the stagecoach rolled into Dry Creek, but the desert had its own plans, its own ways of bringing people together. And sometimes, the very best things in life came disguised as disasters, forcing you to find strength you didn't know you had and love you'd never dared to hope for. The second storm came 3 days after the canyon explosion, this one bringing blessed rain instead of dust. Evelyn stood at the window watching the drops trace patterns on the glass, her body still aching from their narrow escape. The children were at the schoolhouse. Life in Dry Creek continued despite the upheaval of recent events. Behind her, she heard Caleb enter the sheriff's office, his boots heavy with mud. He'd been out since dawn with the territorial marshals, hunting for James Dodd and his surviving men. So far, they'd found 2 bodies in the collapsed canyon, but no sign of Dodd himself. "Anything?" she asked without turning. "Trail went cold at Sulphur Springs." Frustration colored his voice. "He had horses cached there, supplies. This was more planned than we thought." She turned to find him standing by the stove, water dripping from his coat. Without thinking, she moved to help him out of it, hanging the soaked garment on a peg. The domestic gesture came naturally now, 3 days of working side by side having worn away the careful formality between them. "You're exhausted," she observed, noting the deep lines around his eyes. "Can't rest, not with him out there. He knows we've destroyed his plans, his fortune. A desperate man is dangerous, and Dodd's got nothing left to lose." "Except his life," Evelyn said quietly. "Men like Dodd always value that above all else. He'll run far before he risks facing justice." Caleb sank into his chair, running both hands through his wet hair. "Maybe, but something doesn't sit right. The James Dodd I know wouldn't run without settling scores first." A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the rain. "You think he'll come back?" "I think we need to be ready if he does." He looked up at her, gray eyes serious. "I've asked Tom to stay close to the cabin when I'm not there. And Evelyn, I know we said we'd wait for a proper wedding, but you want to move up the ceremony." She'd been expecting this conversation. "Judge Patterson could marry us today. Make it legal, official. Give you the full protection of being my wife." She moved to the second desk, her desk now, and sat down carefully. "Is that the only reason, legal protection?" "You know it's not." His voice roughened. "But I won't pretend it's not a consideration. If something happens to me, nothing will happen to you. Evelyn, be realistic. I'm hunting a desperate man who blames us both for his downfall. If he kills me, as my wife, you'd have the house, my savings, legal standing in the community. The children would have a guardian." "Stop!" She stood abruptly, anger flashing through her. "Just stop. I won't marry you because you're planning your own funeral. I won't start our life together with you already halfway to leaving it." He rose too, crossing to her in 2 strides. "I'm trying to protect you." "I don't want protection." The words burst out louder than intended. "I want a partner. Caleb. Someone who believes we'll face whatever comes together, not someone making contingency plans for his own death." They stood close enough that she could see the raindrops still clinging to his eyelashes, smell the sage and leather scent of him beneath the damp. His hands came up to frame her face, gentle despite his intensity. "You're right," he said softly. "I'm sorry. It's been so long since I had someone to lose. I'd forgotten what it's like to have someone to live for." The anger drained out of her. "Then live," she whispered. "Choose that. Choose us." He kissed her then, and it was different from their first kiss 3 nights ago. Less desperate, more certain. When they parted, she saw peace in his eyes alongside the determination. "All right," he said. "We wait. Do this properly. But Evelyn, I need you to promise me something too. If trouble comes, you don't try to protect me. You take the children and run." "I can't promise that." "Evelyn." "No," she pulled back, meeting his gaze squarely. "I've run before. Caleb, from Missouri, from my old life, from every hard thing that came before Dry Creek. I'm done running. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's what partners do." He looked like he wanted to argue, but a commotion outside interrupted. Tom Garrett burst through the door, supporting a man Evelyn recognized as Pete Patterson, Martha's son, who'd signed away his mother's ranch to Dodd. "Found him on the road," Tom panted. "He's got something to say." Pete was in bad shape, clothes torn, face bruised, hands shaking. Evelyn quickly poured him coffee while Caleb guided him to a chair. "He kept me locked up." Pete gasped out. "Dad, after the canyon, he came to where I was hiding. Said I was coming with him whether I liked it or not. Said I was his insurance." "Where?" Caleb demanded. "The old Apache caves, up in Devil's Canyon. He's got 4, maybe 5 men left. And Sheriff." Pete's face crumpled. "He's planning something. Kept talking about teaching this town a lesson, showing them what happens when they cross James Dodd." "What kind of lesson?" "I don't know exactly, but he sent 2 men to town this morning. Told them to wait for his signal tonight." Caleb was already reaching for his guns. "Tom, round up every man who can shoot. Wait." Evelyn caught his arm. "Think. This could be a trap. Dodd knows you'll come after him if he threatens the town. Maybe that's what he wants." "Doesn't matter. I can't take the chance." "Then don't go alone." She squared her shoulders. "Take me with you." Both men started to protest, but she cut them off. "Listen, Pete said Dodd sent men to town. For what? Not a direct attack. He doesn't have the numbers. This is misdirection. While you're chasing him in the caves, his men do something here." Caleb's eyes narrowed as he followed her logic. "The evidence. Everything we gathered against him is here in this office." "Or the children," Tom said suddenly. "Everyone knows you've been caring for the Martinez orphans. Sheriff, what better way to hurt you?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Caleb's face went hard as granite. "Tom, get to the school. Bring the children to the jail. It's the most defensible building in town. Pete, I need you to draw me a map of those caves." While Pete sketched with shaking hands, Evelyn loaded rifles with practiced efficiency. The rain had stopped, leaving an eerie quiet broken only by distant thunder. "I should be going with Tom," she said. "No, I need you here, coordinating the town defenses. You know Dodd's methods better than anyone. If his men are already here, you'll spot them." It made tactical sense, but she could see the real reason in his eyes. He wanted her where he could protect her. She let it pass. This wasn't the time for arguments about equality. Within an hour, Caleb rode out with 6 armed men, leaving Tom and Evelyn to secure the town. They worked through the afternoon, quietly alerting trusted citizens, positioning watchers, moving the children not just to the jail, but to the hidden cellar beneath it.
"Miss Evelyn?"
Sally asked as they settled the youngsters with blankets and toys. "Are the bad men coming?" "We're just being careful," Evelyn assured her, "like when we practice for storms." But Miguel, old enough to understand, watched her with solemn eyes. "It's Mr. Dodd, isn't it, the one who was mean to you? Sheriff Hart will handle it," she said firmly. "Our job is to stay safe and look after each other." As dusk fell, an unnatural quiet settled over Dry Creek. Shops closed early. Streets emptied. Windows darkened. The town held its breath, waiting. Evelyn stood in the sheriff's office, checking weapons for the 3rd time, when she heard it. The soft scrape of a boot on the boardwalk outside. Wrong somehow. Too careful for honest footsteps. She moved silently to the window, peering through a crack in the shutter. 2 men stood in the shadows across the street, watching the office. She recognized one, Jake Morrison, his arm still in a sling from where she'd shot him. Her mind raced. They were watching the office, but why the evidence was here? Yes, but also... The truth hit her like cold water. They weren't here for papers. They were waiting. For her. Dodd had sent Caleb into a trap and left men to grab the one person whose testimony could destroy him completely. She eased away from the window, thinking fast. Tom was at the jail with the children. The nearest help was 3 buildings away. If she tried to run, they'd see her. If she stayed, eventually they'd come in. Unless... Moving quickly, she stuffed blankets under Caleb's coat, arranging them on the cot in the back room to look like someone sleeping. Then she slipped out the rear door, circling around through the alley. The rain had left puddles that reflected the dying light. She stepped carefully. her father's hunting lessons echoing in her mind. The Winchester felt heavy in her hands, but its weight was reassuring. She came up behind the abandoned barber shop, where she had a clear view of the men watching the office. They hadn't moved, clearly waiting for full dark. That gave her maybe 20 minutes. A hand clamped over her mouth. She struggled, bringing the rifle up, but a familiar voice hissed in her ear. "It's me." "Caleb." She went limp with relief, then pulled free and spun on him. "You're supposed to be at the caves." Pete lied, he said grimly. The caves were empty except for clear signs Dodd had never been there. It was a diversion, but not the way we thought. He wanted me specifically out of town. "There are 2 men watching the office." "I saw them. There are more at the jail, and others near the church. He's not after evidence or children. Evelyn." His jaw tightened. "I think he's after you." The pieces clicked into place. He blames me for exposing his schemes, and if I disappear, the main witness against him is gone. "We need to get you out of town, now!" "No." She gripped the rifle tighter. "I told you, I'm done running. Besides, if we leave, what happens to the children, to the town? Dodd's men won't just give up and go home." "Then what do you suggest?" She looked at him, an idea forming. What if we give him what he wants? Before Caleb could protest, she explained quickly. His face darkened with every word, but she could see him recognizing the tactical sense of it. "I hate this plan," he said flatly. "But it could work. Too many variables, too dangerous." "Everything's dangerous now." She touched his face gently. "Trust me. Trust us." He caught her hand, pressed it against his cheek. "If anything happens to you." "It won't, because you'll be there." Thunder rolled across the desert, and the first drops of new rain began to fall. Time was running out. They moved into position as darkness fell completely. Evelyn walked openly down Main Street, rifle in hand but lowered, looking for all the world like she was simply checking on the town. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but forced herself to maintain steady pace. Behind her, she knew Caleb shadowed her movement. Tom would be doing the same from the other side. They'd quietly positioned men on rooftops. In doorways, the trap was set, but would Dodd's men take the bait? She reached the sheriff's office and made a show of checking the lock before continuing toward the cabin. The rain picked up, masking sounds, turning the street muddy. They came at her between the Mercantile and the hotel, 4 men materializing from the shadows. Jake Morrison led them, his good arm holding a pistol. "Miss Ross," he said with mock politeness. "Mr. Dodd would like a word." "Would he?" She shifted her grip on the rifle. "Then he can come talk to me himself." "Now, don't be difficult. You're coming with us one way or another. Question is whether you can walk or we carry you." She heard the whisper of movement behind her, more men cutting off retreat. Her heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "I'll walk, but I keep my rifle." Morrison laughed. "I don't think so." He stepped forward, reaching for her weapon. That's when Caleb's voice rang out from the darkness. "That's far enough." Suddenly, the street filled with armed men, citizens of Dry Creek stepping from concealment, rifles trained on Dodd's thugs. Morrison froze, calculating odds that had just shifted dramatically against him. "Drop your weapons," Caleb commanded. Emerging from the shadows, "You're surrounded and outgunned." For a moment, Evelyn thought it might work. A bloodless capture. Justice served cleanly. Then she saw Morrison's eyes shift, his mouth twist in a sneer. "Dodd said you might try something like this," he called out. "Said to give you his regards." An explosion rocked the night, not from the street, but from across town. Fire bloomed against the rain-dark sky. The church. "He mined the church!" someone screamed. In the chaos that followed, men running to fight the fire, women screaming, children crying. Morrison made his move. He lunged for Evelyn, using the distraction. She brought the rifle up, but he was too close, too fast, They grappled in the mud, Morrison's greater weight driving her down. Then Caleb was there, hauling Morrison off her, fists flying. The two men rolled in the street, trading brutal blows. Evelyn scrambled for her dropped rifle, came up to find the other thugs scattered, some fleeing, others subdued by townsmen. A gunshot cracked. Caleb jerked, clutching his shoulder. Morrison stood over him, smoking pistol aimed for a killing shot. Evelyn didn't think. The rifle came to her shoulder, her father's training taking over. She fired once, cleanly. Morrison spun and fell, his pistol flying from nerveless fingers. She dropped the rifle and ran to Caleb, falling to her knees beside him. Blood seeped between his fingers, but his eyes were clear, focused on her face. "Just a graze," he managed. "Check Morrison." But she didn't need to. Jake Morrison lay still in the mud, rain washing the surprise from his dead face. Her shot had been true. Tom Garrett appeared, helping Caleb sit up. "The fire's controlled. The rain's helping. Looks like they only blew the bell tower, not the main structure." "The children?" Caleb asked. "Safe. Never left the jail cellar." Relief made Evelyn's hands shake as she pressed her shawl against Caleb's wound. Around them, the town mobilized, fighting fire, securing prisoners, tending wounded. Dry Creek had faced Dodd's worst and survived. "Evelyn," Caleb said softly, "you saved my life." "Returning the favor," she said, trying for lightness despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. He caught her hand with his good one. "I'm sorry for trying to face this alone, for thinking I had to protect you instead of trusting you to stand beside me. We're both still learning," she said, "how to be partners, how to lean on each other." "A sheriff took care of his neighbor's deserted mail-order bride," he murmured, echoing the gossip that had started all this. "But that's not the real story, is it?" "No," she agreed, helping him to his feet as Doc Peterson arrived. "The real story is how she took care of him right back, how they took care of each other." Later, much later, after Caleb's shoulder was bandaged and statements were given and the town began to settle, they sat together on the jail steps. The rain had passed, leaving the air clean and stars beginning to peek through scattered clouds. "Dodd's still out there," Tom reported, approaching them. "But with Morrison dead and his gang scattered, he's got no power left. Judge Patterson's put a bounty on him that'll have every lawman in 3 territories hunting him. He'll run to Mexico," Caleb predicted. "Try to disappear. Men like Dodd always choose their own skin over revenge in the end." "And us?" Evelyn asked quietly. "What do we choose?" Caleb looked at her. This woman who'd walked into hell beside him without flinching, who'd saved his life twice over, once from a bullet, and once from the isolation he'd wrapped around himself like armor. "We choose the life we've started building," he said firmly. "The children, the town, each other. We choose to stop looking over our shoulders and start looking forward." She leaned against his good shoulder, careful of his wound. "I like that choice." Tom cleared his throat. "Judge Patterson says he'll be happy to perform a wedding whenever you're ready. Says after tonight, the whole town wants to celebrate something good." Caleb and Evelyn exchanged glances, a whole conversation in a look. "Tell him next Sunday," Evelyn said. "That gives us a week to do this properly." "And gives my shoulder time to heal." Caleb added, "I want to be able to hold my bride with both arms." Tom grinned and headed off to spread the news. Within minutes, they could hear celebrating beginning in the saloons, the town ready to embrace joy after fear. "Are you sure?" Caleb asked. "A week's not much time to plan a wedding." "I don't need elaborate plans," Evelyn said simply. "I just need you, the children, and a community that's become home. Everything else is decoration." He kissed her then. There on the jail steps with half the town probably watching, let them see. Let them know that what had started as charity had become choice, that what began in crisis had bloomed into love. When they finally stood to head home, their home, soon to be official, Evelyn paused to look back at the town. Dry Creek bore scars from the night's violence, but it stood strong, like her, like them. No more storms tonight, Caleb observed, scanning the clearing sky.
No,
Evelyn agreed, taking his offered arm. I think we've weathered enough for a while. They walked home through streets already being cleaned of mud and debris, past neighbors calling out congratulations and thanks. The children would be waiting, full of questions and needing reassurance. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, legal proceedings, rebuilding, the ongoing hunt for James Dodd. But tonight, they had peace. They had each other, and in a harsh land where happiness was hard-won and precious as water, that was more than enough. It was everything. The morning of the confrontation dawned bright and merciless. Evelyn stood in the doorway of what would soon be her new home, watching dust devils dance across the yard. 5 days had passed since the night of fire and gunshots. 5 days of relative peace that felt like the held breath before a storm. You're up early, Caleb said, coming up behind her. His shoulder was healing well, though he still favored it. Couldn't sleep. She leaned back against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Something feels wrong. He was quiet for a moment. I feel it too, like the air before lightning strikes. They'd moved her belongings into the main house yesterday, preparing for the wedding tomorrow. The children were thrilled, already calling her Miss Evelyn, who's gonna be Mama. The title made her heart swell and ache simultaneously. Sheriff, Tom Garrett's voice carried across the morning air. He was riding hard, his horse lathered with sweat. Caleb stepped past Evelyn, hand instinctively checking his gun.
what is it?
Tom swung down from his saddle. Rider spotted at dawn, moving through Skeleton Ridge. 6, maybe 7 men? Dodd. Has to be. Who else would skulk around instead of riding straight in? Tom's face was grim. There's more. The Watson family didn't make it to town for supplies yesterday like planned. I rode out to check. Their place is ransacked. Horses gone. Evelyn's blood chilled. The Watsons had 3 young children.
Are they?
No bodies, Tom said quickly.
But no sign of them either. It's like they just vanished.
Caleb's jaw tightened.
He's gathering hostages, insurance for whatever he's planning.
The Hendersons are missing too, Tom continued.
And old Sam Clearwater, all folks who stood against Dodd, all disappeared in the night.
How did we not know until now? Caleb demanded.
These are scattered homesteads. Sheriff, some of them only come to town once a month. If I hadn't gotten worried about the Watsons. Evelyn's mind raced, putting pieces together. He's not running. He never was. He's been planning this, gathering leverage.
For what? Tom asked. But Evelyn knew. She could see it in Caleb's eyes too, the terrible understanding of what a desperate man might do with innocent lives in his hands.
He wants me, she said quietly. All of this, the attacks, the fear, now hostages. He blames me for destroying everything he built.
Over my dead body, Caleb growled.
That's probably his plan too,
she said, trying for dark humor but failing. The sound of approaching horses made them all tense. But it was Father Miguel, riding with unusual haste for the elderly priest. Behind him came Mrs. Weatherby and several other townspeople.
Sheriff,
Father Miguel said, breathing hard. A message was left at the church, pinned to the door with a knife. He handed over a piece of paper. Evelyn read over Caleb's shoulder, her heart sinking with each word. Asterisk to the good people of Dry Creek. You harbored a liar and a thief. You stood against progress and prosperity. Now you'll pay the price. I have 9 of your citizens, including 5 children. Their lives hang in the balance. Send the Ross woman to Bone Valley at sunset. She comes alone, unarmed. Any attempt at trickery and they all die. You have until sunset. James Dodd. Asterisk. Bone Valley, Tom muttered. That's a box canyon. Only one way in or out. Perfect for an ambush. We're not sending Evelyn, Caleb said flatly. We're not letting 9 people die either.
Evelyn countered. There has to be another way. What way? She turned to face him fully. Caleb, he has children. The Watson girls are 6 and 8. Little Sam Clearwater just turned 3. We can't gamble with their lives.
So we gamble with yours instead. The crowd was growing as word spread. Soon half the town had gathered, fear and anger rippling through the assembled faces.
We could send men around through Devil's Pass.
Someone suggested.
Come at the canyon from above.
Tom shook his head. Take too long. And if Dodd has lookouts,
which he surely does, he'll see them coming.
What if we offered him money, Mrs. Weatherby suggested. Surely there's a price. His fortune's gone, Evelyn said. His reputation's destroyed. He can never come back to Dry Creek, never rebuild what he had. Money won't satisfy him now. He wants revenge. On you, Caleb said harshly, for the crime of exposing his theft and lies.
Then I'll go, she said simply.
The crowd erupted in protests, but Caleb's voice cut through them all.
No, absolutely not. I forbid it.
Evelyn's temper flared.
You forbid it. You're not my husband yet. Caleb Hart, you don't get to forbid me anything.
I'm the sheriff.
Then act like it.
She immediately regretted the sharpness, but pushed on.
Those are your people out there, our neighbors. Children who've played with Sally and Miguel. You'd sacrifice them for me.
I won't sacrifice anyone, he said desperately.
There has to be another way.
Father Miguel cleared his throat. Perhaps there is, Miss Ross. You're a brave woman to consider this. But what if you weren't quite as alone as Mr. Dodd believes? Explain, Caleb demanded. The priest smiled slightly. I may be old, but I remember my days riding with the territorial militia. A woman's traveling cloak can hide many things. A thin person walking beside her, perhaps someone skilled with close-quarter combat. It's still too risky, Caleb began. I'll do it, Tom said suddenly.
I'm thin enough, short enough. Put me in a dress and bonnet, walking beside Miss Evelyn with my head down, and from a distance in failing light.
2 people instead of 1 doubles our chances, Evelyn said, hope stirring. And what happens when you reach Dodd? Caleb demanded. When he realizes the deception, then we fight, Evelyn said firmly, and we trust that you'll be there when we need you. They spent the day in frantic preparation. The plan, such as it was, took shape. Evelyn would approach Bone Valley openly, with Tom disguised beside her. Meanwhile, Caleb would lead men on foot through the rough country, getting as close as possible without being seen. At sunset, timing would be everything. The children knew something was wrong. Sally clung to Evelyn's skirts while she tried to prepare, asking why everyone looked scared. Miguel offered to come help, his young face fierce with determination.
Your job is here,
Evelyn told him gently.
Protecting your sisters, helping the other children stay calm. Can you do that?
He nodded solemnly. But you'll come back.
I'll come back,
she promised, praying it wasn't a lie. As afternoon waned, she found herself in the church, seeking a moment of peace before the storm. Caleb found her there, slipping into the pew beside her. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for trying to forbid you, for thinking I could protect you by controlling you. You're forgiven, she said, taking his hand. I understand the impulse. If positions were reversed, I'd want to lock you in the jail cell to keep you safe.
Don't think I didn't consider it,
he admitted with grim humor. They sat in silence for a moment, afternoon light streaming through the simple windows. Tomorrow they were supposed to be married in this very church. Instead, they faced the possibility that there might not be a tomorrow.
Caleb,
she said softly,
if something happens?
Nothing will happen.
But if it does,
she squeezed his hand. I need you to know that these weeks with you have been worth everything. Coming to Dry Creek, facing all of this? I'd do it again in a heartbeat because it brought me to you. He turned to her, cupping her face with his free hand. You're going to be fine. We're going to get married tomorrow and raise those children and grow old together in this impossible little town. I won't accept any other outcome.
From your lips to God's ears,
She murmured. He kissed her then, fierce and desperate and full of promises. When they parted, she saw tears in his eyes. Come back to me, he whispered. Always, she promised. The sun was already low when they assembled at the edge of town. Tom looked remarkably convincing in borrowed skirts and cloak, though he grumbled about the restriction of movement. Evelyn wore her traveling dress, the same one she'd arrived in, now cleaned and mended. It seemed fitting somehow, coming full circle. Remember, Caleb instructed Tom quietly. Stay close to her. Head down. Shuffle your walk. In the dusk. He won't notice until you're close. When I give the signal. I know, Tom assured him. Trust me. Sheriff, I won't let anything happen to her. Caleb pulled Evelyn aside for one last moment.
That revolver in your boot, you remember how to use it?
My father taught me well, she reminded him. Good. Don't hesitate if you need to.
Caleb,
she touched his face.
this is going to work.
It better, he said roughly. I've already lost one family. I won't survive losing another. You won't have to, she promised. They set out as the sun touched the horizon, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Evelyn walked steadily, Tom beside her with his head down, playing the part of a cowed companion, behind them. She knew Caleb and his men were melting into the landscape, taking the hard route to the canyon. The walk seemed both endless and too short. With each step, Bone Valley grew closer, a narrow slash in the red rock that looked exactly like what it was, a trap. At the canyon mouth, two men stepped out of concealment, rifles ready. Evelyn recognized them as some of Dodd's hired guns. That's close enough. One called, "You alone?" I brought my maid, Evelyn called back, gesturing to Tom. Surely, mister, Dodd won't grudge me a woman's companionship in my final moments. The men conferred briefly. Then one gestured with his rifle. All right, but any tricks and the hostages pay. They entered the canyon, walls rising steep and close on either side. The dying light barely reached the sandy floor. Ahead, Evelyn could see a wider space where the canyon opened slightly, and there were the hostages, tied and huddled against one wall. Her heart clenched seeing the Watson children, terrified and crying. And there was James Dodd. He'd lost weight in the days since the explosion, his fine clothes replaced with trail gear, but his eyes burned with the same cold fury she remembered from that first day at the saloon. Miss Ross, he said, voice carrying easily in the natural amphitheater. So good of you to accept my invitation.
Let them go,
Evelyn said.
You have me. That's what you wanted.
Is it? Dodd stepped closer, and she could see the madness dancing at the edges of his composure. What I wanted was an empire. What I wanted was respect. What I wanted was to matter in this godforsaken wasteland. You took all that away.
You took it away yourself,
she said steadily.
With your greed and your lies.
His hand cracked across her face, snapping her head to the side. Tom made an involuntary movement, and Dodd's men raised their rifles. Careful, Dodd warned. Wouldn't want your maid to do something foolish. Evelyn tasted blood but kept her voice level. What now, you kill me? Then what, it won't bring back your fortune or your reputation? No, he agreed. But it will serve as a lesson. Cross James Dodd and pay the price. Your sheriff will find your body, and he'll know he failed to protect you. The town will remember that their meddling cost lives. And the hostages? Dodd shrugged. Depends on how cooperative they are after watching you die. The light was almost gone. Where was Caleb? Evelyn fought down panic, keeping Dodd's attention on her. You know what your problem is, she said, gambling on his ego. You always thought too small. His eyes narrowed. Small? Dry Creek was never going to be enough for a man like you. You should have gone to San Francisco, Denver, someplace where your schemes could have made you truly rich. Instead, you wasted your talents on a frontier town that was always going to see through you eventually. You think you're clever, Dodd snarled. The mousy little mail-order bride who brought down James Dodd. They'll write songs about you. Will they? No, Evelyn said. They'll forget us both. In 10 years, Dry Creek will barely remember your name. You'll be nothing but a cautionary tale told in saloons. Dodd's face contorted with rage. He drew his pistol. Then I'd better make sure the lesson is memorable. That's when Tom moved. In one fluid motion, he threw off the cloak and bonnet, revealing the sheriff's badge beneath. His gun was already clearing leather as Dodd's men shouted in alarm. Everything happened at once. Gunfire erupted from the canyon walls as Caleb's men revealed themselves. Dodd swung his pistol toward Tom, but Evelyn was already moving. The small revolver from her boot came up, and she fired. Dodd staggered, looking down in shock at the spreading red stain on his shirt. You, he gasped. My father taught me to shoot rabbits, Evelyn said quietly. You're not much different, just bigger and meaner. Dodd fell to his knees, then forward. Around them, the gunfight was already ending. Dodd's men surrendering or fleeing, faced with superior numbers and position. Caleb was suddenly there, pulling her into his arms. Are you hurt? Did he? I'm fine, she assured him, though her hands shook. The hostages. Tom's freeing them. He held her tighter. You did it. You actually did it. We did it, she corrected. Together. Looking down at Dodd's still form, she felt no satisfaction, only a weary relief. It was over. The man who'd brought her to Dry Creek as a pawn in his schemes was gone, and with him the threat to everything she'd come to love. Is he? She asked. Caleb checked for a pulse, then nodded. He's gone. It's finished. The hostages were crying with relief, families reuniting. Little Sam Clearwater ran to Evelyn, throwing his small arms around her legs. You saved us, he declared. You're a hero like Sheriff Caleb. She knelt to hug him properly, tears finally coming around them. The rescue party worked to get everyone ready for the journey home. Tom clapped her on the shoulder, grinning despite the danger they'd just faced. Not bad for a mail-order bride, he teased. Though I have to say, these skirts are a menace. Don't know how you ladies manage. That broke the tension, laughter rippling through the group. Even some of the former hostages managed weak smiles. As they prepared to leave the canyon, Caleb took Evelyn's hand. So, he said conversationally, you still want to marry a sheriff who nearly got you killed? Nearly got me killed. She raised an eyebrow. Seems to me I'm the one who walked into the trap. Besides, she added, squeezing his hand, someone needs to keep you from being so overprotective. Might as well be me. Might as well, he agreed, and kissed her there in the canyon with everyone watching and cheering. They made their way home under a blanket of stars. The hostages safe. The threat ended. Dry Creek's lights beckoned in the distance, and Evelyn felt a surge of homecoming stronger than anything she'd known before. The church will still be decorated for tomorrow, someone called out. Shame to waste a good wedding setup. Who says it's wasted? Caleb responded. As far as I'm concerned, we've got a wedding to attend tomorrow. After all this, Evelyn asked, people will want to rest, recover. Are you joking? Mrs. Weatherby interrupted. After what you two just did, the whole town will want to celebrate. It's not every day we get to see good triumph so completely over evil. And so it was decided. Tomorrow, as planned, Evelyn Ross would marry Caleb Hart, not as a desperate woman seeking protection or a convenient arrangement, but as a full partner who'd proven her worth in the most difficult circumstances imaginable. No more adventures after this, Caleb murmured as they walked. Just quiet days raising children and keeping the peace.
Evelyn laughed. In Dry Creek, I doubt it, but whatever comes, we'll face it. Together, he agreed. Together, she confirmed. Behind them, Tom was regaling the others with his brief career as a woman, complete with exaggerated demonstrations of walking in skirts. The children who'd been hostages were already turning fear into adventure, sure to tell the tale for years to come. And James Dodd lay still in Bone Valley. His schemes ended, his empire of dust blown away by the desert wind. Justice had come in the form of a mail-order bride who'd refused to be anyone's victim, and a sheriff who'd learned that protecting someone sometimes meant trusting them to protect themselves. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and unchanging, as the unlikely procession made its way home. Tomorrow there would be a wedding. After that, a life to build, children to raise, a town to protect and serve. But tonight, under the vast desert sky, there was only gratitude for survival, for courage found in unlikely places, and for love that had grown in the harsh soil of a frontier town. It was, Evelyn thought as she walked hand in hand with her soon-to-be husband, more than she'd ever dared to dream when she'd stepped off that stagecoach into an uncertain future. It was everything. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, as if the desert itself had dressed up for the occasion. Evelyn stood before the small mirror in what was now her bedroom, pinning up her hair with trembling fingers. Through the window, she could see townspeople already gathering at the church, their Sunday best creating splashes of color against the dusty street. "Miss Evelyn, you look beautiful," Sally burst into the room, followed closely by her siblings. The little girl wore a new dress Mrs. Weatherby had sewn for the occasion, yellow as sunshine. "Thank you, sweetheart," Evelyn said, smoothing the child's hair. "You look quite lovely yourself." Miguel stood in the doorway, uncomfortable in his borrowed suit but trying to look grown up. "Sheriff Hart asked me to give you this," he said, holding out a small box. Inside was a simple gold locket on a delicate chain. Evelyn opened it to find 2 tiny photographs, one of herself that must have been taken without her knowing, and one of Caleb with all 3 children. Her eyes misted. "Help me put it on," she asked Sally, who eagerly obliged. A knock at the door made them all turn. Mrs. Weatherby entered with several other women from town, all smiling. The same women who had planned to drive her out just weeks ago now came as friends, bearing small gifts and good wishes. "We wanted to help you prepare," Mrs. Weatherby said, almost shyly. "If you'll have us." "I'd be honored," Evelyn said, meaning it. As the women fussed over her dress and flowers, Evelyn marveled at the transformation, not just in how the town saw her, but in how she saw herself. The uncertain woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach was gone. In her place stood someone who'd found her strength, her purpose, her home. 5 minutes, Father Miguel called from downstairs. "The groom is getting nervous." The walk to the church felt both endless and too brief. The whole town had indeed turned out, lining the street, calling out congratulations. Children threw wildflower petals, and Evelyn had to blink back tears at the unexpected beauty of it all. Inside the church, decorated with desert roses and white ribbon, Caleb waited at the altar. He wore his best suit, the star still pinned to his vest because he was never truly off duty. But it was his expression that stopped her heart joy mixed with wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe this was real. Tom Garrett, serving as best man, whispered something that made Caleb smile. The church was packed, every pew full, people standing along the walls. These were their people now, their community, their family. Judge Patterson had come from the county seat to officiate. Having heard the whole story of recent events, he beamed as Evelyn reached the altar, Caleb taking her hands with infinite gentleness. "Dearly beloved," the judge began, "we gather today to witness something extraordinary, not just a marriage, but a triumph of courage over fear, of love over adversity, of community over chaos."
Evelyn barely heard the traditional words that followed. She was lost in Caleb's eyes, in the warmth of his hands holding hers, in the rightness of this moment. When it came time for vows, Caleb spoke first. "Evelyn Ross," he said, voice strong and clear. "You came to Dry Creek as a stranger, but you've become its heart. You've shown me that protecting someone doesn't mean sheltering them from the world, but standing beside them as they face it. You've brought light back into my life and given my children a mother they desperately needed. I promise to love you, trust you, and partner with you in all things, for all the days of my life." Evelyn had to swallow past the lump in her throat before she could speak. "Caleb Hart, you offered me shelter when I had nowhere to go, but you gave me so much more. You gave me purpose, respect, and a love I never dared dream of. You've shown me that strength isn't about standing alone, but about having the courage to let others stand with you. I promise to love you, support you, and face whatever comes alongside you for all the days of my life." "The rings?" Judge Patterson asked. Miguel stepped forward importantly, carrying the simple gold bands they'd chosen. As Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger, Evelyn remembered another piece of jewelry, his mother's cameo, offered what felt like a lifetime ago as protection. Now she wore it pinned to her dress, not as armor, but as acknowledgement of the family she was joining. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona," Judge Patterson declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Sheriff, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was tender, perfect, and thoroughly disrupted by three small bodies crashing into them. Sally, Miguel, and little Anna wrapped their arms around both adults, making the congregation laugh. "Are you our mama now?" Sally asked hopefully. "Yes, sweetheart," Evelyn said, kneeling to embrace them all. "I'm your mama now." The celebration that followed spilled out of the church and into the street. Tables appeared as if by magic, laden with food. Someone brought out a fiddle, and soon there was dancing. Even the territorial marshals who'd come to transport Dodd's captured men stayed to join the festivities. Not quite the wedding you imagined when you answered that advertisement. Caleb murmured as they danced, his shoulder finally healed enough to hold her properly. "No," Evelyn agreed, smiling up at him. "It's infinitely better." As the afternoon wore on, people shared stories. Tom regaled listeners with increasingly embellished versions of his adventure in women's clothing. The Watsons spoke tearfully of their rescue. Father Miguel blessed the union multiple times, growing more eloquent with each toast. But it was Mrs. Weatherby who surprised Evelyn most, pulling her aside during a quiet moment. "I owe you more than an apology," the older woman said. "I owe you my thanks. You've shown us all what real courage looks like, and you've reminded us what kind of town we want to be, one that protects its own, that stands for justice, that welcomes those who need a home." "We all played our part," Evelyn said diplomatically. "Perhaps, but you and the sheriff led the way." Mrs. Weatherby smiled. "I hope you'll forgive a foolish old woman her prejudices, and I hope we might be friends." "I'd like that," Evelyn said, and meant it. As evening approached, Caleb found her sitting with the children, Sally asleep in her lap, while Miguel showed baby Anna how to fold paper into shapes. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Hart?" he asked, the new name sending warmth through her. "Almost," she said. "I just want to remember this. All of it." He sat beside her, arm around her shoulders. "We've got a lifetime to make more memories." "A lifetime," she repeated, liking the sound of it. The next morning, Evelyn woke in her new role as wife, mother, and partner. The house was already stirring, children's voices mixing with Caleb's deeper tones. She dressed quickly and found them all in the kitchen, attempting to make breakfast. "We wanted to surprise you," Caleb said sheepishly, gesturing at the flour-covered surfaces and slightly burned pancakes. "It's perfect," she laughed, kissing his cheek and ruffling Miguel's hair. They ate their imperfect breakfast together, a family complete. Later, Caleb would return to his sheriff duties and Evelyn to organizing the office and helping with the town's books. The children would attend school, play with friends, grow under the care of parents who loved them. Life in Dry Creek wouldn't always be easy. There would be more challenges: rustlers, droughts, conflicts between ranchers and farmers, the slow march of progress that would eventually bring the railroad and change everything. But they would face it all together. 2 months later, a letter arrived from Missouri. Evelyn recognized the handwriting. Samuel Morrison, the shopkeeper who'd written the damning letter for Dodd, with Caleb beside her. She opened it. Asterisk, Miss Ross, Mrs. Hartnow. I hope I write to beg your forgiveness. James Dodd held papers on my store, threatened to ruin me if I didn't write what he dictated. When I heard what happened, how you triumphed over his schemes, I was both relieved and deeply ashamed. I've enclosed a bank draft for $500, the payment he gave me for my betrayal. Perhaps it can help your new family or your town. I pray you can forgive a weak man his cowardice. S. Morrison asterisk. Evelyn looked at Caleb. What should we do with it? What do you want to do? She thought for a moment. The town needs a proper school, one with books and supplies and maybe even a trained teacher from back east. Then that's what we'll do, he agreed. Turn Dodd's corruption into something good. She folded the letter carefully. I forgive him, she said quietly. Fear makes people do terrible things. But courage. She looked around their kitchen, where children's drawings covered the walls and sunlight streamed through curtains she'd sewn herself. Courage can transform everything. A year later, the Dry Creek School stood proud on Main Street, built with donations from across the county, but started with Samuel Morrison's guilt money. Evelyn taught there 3 days a week, helping children who reminded her of herself, lost, searching for where they belonged. The Hart family had grown too, not just in the adoption papers that made the Martinez children officially theirs, but in the way they'd become a cornerstone of the community. Their home was a refuge for those who needed it. Their table always had room for one more. Their hearts had space for every stray child or lonely soul who found their way to Dry Creek. You know what I've been thinking, Caleb said one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the children chase fireflies. What's that? Evelyn asked, comfortable against his shoulder. That stagecoach bringing you here was the best thing that ever happened to this town, to me, even with all the trouble that followed. Especially with that, he said firmly. It woke us up, made us remember what we stand for, brought us together. She thought about that long-ago woman who'd answered a stranger's advertisement, desperate for a new life. How could she have imagined it would lead to this, to love, family, purpose, home? No regrets, she asked. Not one, he assured her. You. Only one, she said, and he tensed until she continued with a smile. I wish I'd gotten on that stagecoach sooner, he laughed, pulling her closer. Impatient woman. Good thing I'm patient enough for both of us. Good thing, she agreed. The stars came out one by one, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their struggles, their triumphs. Below them, Dry Creek settled into evening routines. Families gathering, shops closing, the saloon piano starting its nightly serenade. It wasn't the life Evelyn Ross had imagined when she'd left Missouri. It was harder in some ways, simpler in others. It had tested her, changed her, given her strength she'd never known she possessed. But as she sat with her husband, listening to their children's laughter, surrounded by a community that had become family, she knew one thing for certain. She was home, and in the end, that was the only happily ever after that mattered. Years later, when Sally was grown and writing down the family stories for her own children, she would title this one simply, How Love Came to Dry Creek. But those who'd lived through it knew the fuller truth. How love had not just come but conquered, transforming a desperate mail-order bride and a grieving sheriff into something greater than either could have been alone. The desert had tested them with wind and fire, drought and storm, but they'd proven stronger than any trial, rooted deep as the ancient cacti, enduring as the stones. And in that endurance, they'd found their forever. 5 years had passed since that wedding day, and spring had come again to Dry Creek. Evelyn stood in the doorway of the new schoolhouse, watching her students scatter for lunch. Among them ran her own children, Sally, now 13 and beginning to show signs of the young woman she'd become, Miguel, 17 and already taller than Caleb, and Anna, 7 years old and full of mischief. "Mrs. Hart," a small voice called, and she turned to see Timothy Watson running toward her, clutching a letter. "Pa said to give this to you special. It's from back east." Evelyn took the envelope, recognizing the official seal of a publisher in Boston. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, reading quickly. Then she had to sit down on the schoolhouse steps, overwhelmed. "Good news, I hope," Mary Henderson asked, approaching with a basket of food for the children who stayed through lunch. "They want to publish it," Evelyn said faintly. "The book about Dry Creek, about everything that happened. They say it could inspire other frontier towns." She'd started writing their story 2 years ago, initially just to preserve it for the children. But Father Miguel had encouraged her to send it to publishers, saying the world needed to hear about courage found in unexpected places. "That's wonderful," Mary exclaimed. "Our little town, famous." That evening, Evelyn waited until after dinner to share the news. Caleb was in his chair by the fire, cleaning his rifle while the children did their lessons. The sheriff's badge still gleamed on his vest, though these days his duties were more about settling disputes over water rights than chasing outlaws. "I have something to tell you all," she announced. Miguel looked up from his arithmetic. "Are we getting another brother or sister?" he asked with the casual acceptance of a boy who'd seen their family grow steadily over the years. "No," Evelyn laughed, "though little James is handful enough." She glanced at the toddler sleeping in his cradle, their miracle child, born 3 years into their marriage when they'd thought their family complete. "Then what?" Sally asked, ever curious. "Remember the story I've been writing about how we all became a family? The one where I wore a dress?" Tom Garrett's voice came from the doorway. He'd taken to joining them for dinner regularly since his own marriage to Mary Henderson last year. "Please tell me you changed that part." "I kept every word," Evelyn teased. "Especially the part where you complained about the petticoats." "Woman's got no mercy," Tom groaned, but he was smiling. "They want to publish it," Evelyn continued. "As a real book, people all over the country might read our story." Caleb set down his rifle, pride shining in his eyes. "That's amazing. Evie, you've worked so hard on it." "Will we be famous?" Anna asked, eyes wide. "Maybe a little," Evelyn said. "But more importantly, other people might find hope in what we've built here. Other towns might learn that standing together is stronger than standing alone." The next morning brought unexpected visitors. An elegant carriage, out of place on Dry Creek's dusty streets, stopped in front of the sheriff's office. A well-dressed woman emerged, followed by 2 children clutching carpet bags. Evelyn, working at her desk, looked up as the woman entered. Something about her seemed familiar, though she couldn't place it. "I'm looking for Sheriff Hart," the woman said, her cultured voice trembling slightly. And Mrs. Evelyn Hart." "I'm Evelyn," she said, rising. "How can I help you?" The woman's composure crumbled. "I'm Catherine Dodd. James was my brother." Evelyn's hand went to her throat, beside her. Caleb stood slowly, hand near his weapon out of habit. "I'm not here for revenge," Catherine said quickly. "I'm here because I have nowhere else to go. My husband died 6 months ago, and when his family learned about James, about what he'd done here, they cast us out, said they wouldn't harbor the family of a criminal." She gestured to the children,
a boy of perhaps 10 and a girl of 8, both trying to look brave. I remembered from the newspaper accounts. They said you took in children, that you helped people start over. I thought perhaps you're asking us to help the family of the man who tried to kill my wife. Caleb's voice was carefully neutral. I'm asking you to help children who had nothing to do with their uncle's crimes, Catherine said with quiet dignity. But I understand if you refuse. I had to try. Evelyn looked at the children, the boy holding his sister's hand protectively, both of them clearly frightened and exhausted. She thought of another woman who'd stood with nothing, judged for circumstances beyond her control. What are your names? She asked the children gently. Robert, the boy said. And this is Louise. Are you hungry? Robert and Louise. They nodded shyly. Evelyn turned to Caleb, a whole conversation in a glance. He sighed, but she saw acceptance in his eyes. Tom, he called to his deputy, can you help Mrs. Dodd and her children get settled at the boarding house and let Mrs. McKay know to put their meals on my account? Catherine's eyes filled with tears. You're not turning us away. Children aren't responsible for the sins of their relations, Evelyn said firmly. Your brother made his choices. That doesn't mean you and your children should suffer forever. But the town, won't they object? Some might, Caleb admitted. But this town has learned a lot about second chances. We'll see what happens. As Tom led the Dodd family out, Caleb turned to Evelyn. You realize what you've just done. The right thing, she said simply. The same thing you did for me all those years ago. You never tried to destroy the town, he pointed out. No, but the town was ready to destroy me until you stood in the way. She moved to him, hands on his chest. That's what we do. Isn't it stand between the storm and those who need shelter? He pulled her close. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher. The integration of the Dodd family into Dry Creek wasn't without challenges. There were whispers, cold shoulders, a few harsh words, but there were also unexpected kindnesses. Mrs. Weatherby taking Catherine under her wing, teaching positions opening up at the school for someone with her education. The other children gradually accepting Robert and Louise into their games. 3 months later, the first copies of Evelyn's book arrived. The whole town gathered for a reading at the church, even Catherine Dodd sitting quietly in the back. Evelyn read selected passages, her voice carrying the story of fear transformed to courage, of strangers becoming family, of a town that chose justice over easy prosperity. When she finished, the silence was profound. Then old Sam Clearwater stood up, the child who'd been held hostage, now a young man of 8. That's our story, he said wonderingly. We're in a real book. We're all in it, Evelyn confirmed. Every person who stood together, who chose right over easy, who offered shelter to strangers. This isn't just my story or Caleb's, it's Dry Creek's story. The applause started slowly, then built to thunder. Even Catherine Dodd clapped, tears streaming down her face. Later, as families dispersed to their homes, Evelyn and Caleb walked hand in hand down Main Street. The town had grown, new businesses, new families, even talk of the railroad finally coming through. But at its heart, it remained the same community that had weathered storms together. Do you ever think about how different life might have been? Caleb asked. If that stagecoach had never brought you here. Sometimes, Evelyn admitted. But then I look at our children, our friends, our life, and I can't imagine being anywhere else. They paused at the spot where the old cabin used to stand, now part of their expanded house, transformed from a shelter to a true home. In the yard, the tree they'd planted on their first anniversary spread its branches, offering shade to the bench where they often sat in the evenings. I need to tell you something, Evelyn said. Something I've been waiting for the right moment to share. Caleb looked at her with concern. What is it? She took his hand, placed it on her stomach.
It seems James is going to have a brother or sister. The joy that lit his face was brighter than the setting sun.
Really?
Really, due in the fall, Doc Peterson thinks. He kissed her then, right there in the street where anyone could see, not caring about propriety or dignity. When they parted, both were laughing through tears.
Another addition to the Hart family chaos, he said.
Can you handle it? Sheriff, with you beside me, I can handle anything. As they walked home, the last light painting the desert in shades of gold and rose, Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate mail-order bride to a beloved teacher and mother. From a grieving widower to a man whose heart had room for every lost soul who needed shelter. From a town divided by greed to a community united by shared trials and triumphs. Inside their home, chaos reigned as usual. Sally was trying to teach Anna to play the piano Tom had somehow acquired for them. Miguel was showing Robert Dodd how to whittle, patient with the younger boy's clumsy attempts. Baby James had escaped his playpen and was cheerfully spreading jam on everything within reach.
I'll get James.
Caleb sighed, but he was smiling. I'll help the boys, Evelyn said.
And maybe rescue the piano from our daughters.
Then dinner, he asked, hopefully. Then dinner, she confirmed. Together, as always. As the stars emerged one by one in the vast desert sky, the Hart house glowed with lamplight and laughter. In the kitchen, where so many important moments had taken place, the family gathered around the table that had grown larger with each passing year.
Sally said grace, her young voice clear and sweet. Thank you for our family, for our town, for second chances and new beginnings. Thank you for bringing Mama to us on that stagecoach, and for Papa keeping her safe. Thank you for every person who chose courage over fear.
Amen. Amen, they all echoed. Outside, a coyote called to the moon, and the desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibilities. Inside, a family born of loss and hope, struggle and triumph, shared their evening meal and their lives. Evelyn looked around the table at each beloved face and felt her heart overflow. This was what she'd traveled across half a continent to find, though she hadn't known it at the time. Not just a husband or a home, but a purpose. Not just safety, but the chance to offer safety to others.
Mama,
Anna piped up.
Will you tell us the story again about how you and Papa met?
You've heard it 100 times, Miguel protested.
I like it,
Anna insisted.
It has adventures and heroes and a happy ending.
All the best stories do, Evelyn agreed, catching Caleb's eye across the table. Very well. It was a hot afternoon in late summer when the stagecoach brought me to Dry Creek. As she began the familiar tale, embellished now with years of telling, the family settled in to listen. Even those who knew every word leaned in, drawn by the magic of a story that was theirs and yet bigger than them all. And in that moment, with her family around her and new life growing within her, Evelyn Hart knew that every trial had been worth it. Every moment of fear, every challenge faced, every choice to stand and fight rather than run, all of it had led to this. A love that had transformed two broken people into something whole. A family that defined itself not by blood but by choice. A town that had learned to choose justice over profit, community over division. A life that proved sometimes the best endings come from the worst beginnings. The desert stars wheeled overhead, ancient witnesses to the small human dramas below, and in a house at the edge of Dry Creek, Arizona territory, a mail-order bride who'd found her place in the world continued her story, surrounded by love that would echo through generations. It was, as Anna had said, a happy ending. But more than that, it was a happy beginning to all the chapters yet to come. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, courage, and redemption in the Old West. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what touched your heart in Evelyn and Caleb's journey. If this story moved you, Please subscribe to Wild West Night for more tales of frontier romance and adventure. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button to help more listeners discover these heartwarming stories of the American frontier. Until next time, partners.